So this week we have Nick Klingensmith, who's developed a toolkit called StereoKit, which is designed to make it fun and easy to develop OpenXR applications. It has a code-first approach, was a little different from most of the other tools that you might have used. And I had a chance to, and Sasha as well, see his presentation back at AWE in November, and I was really impressed by it. And I was really happy he accepted the invitation to come and share it with the group. So, Nick, if you'd like to go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, all right. Well, first of all, it's really great to meet all of you guys. I don't often get to do presentations where we do introductions, so this is nice. If you've got any questions during the presentation, feel free to hop in and interrupt me. I'm happy to do that. So I'm gonna share my screen. I don't usually present on this computer, so we'll see how well this works. It's kind of a widescreen one. There we go. Everybody see that all right?
Yep.
Cool. So like Michael mentioned, StereoKit is a code-first mixed reality engine. This is kind of an interesting thing. So I work at Microsoft. I've spent a lot of time helping developers build tools and work on projects. And this kind of has put me in a really interesting position where I get to see what sort of problems people are running into. Being a developer myself, I know what problems I have. And you know, I think I was at a small hackathon over in Tokyo one time, like this was about 2.5 years ago. And I was just like all these problems, like I really just need to start from scratch and like build something that solves everything, because you know the ground that we've been working on is really just not designed well for mixed reality. So this is kind of like me tackling mixed reality development from the perspective of how I wish it was. So yeah, this is a quick little video of kind of like what sort of thing StereoKit does. As you can see, it's got like hands, it's got these environment, it has a little bit of this user interface and interactive elements. They're kind of volumetric. And so it does all of these things, and it does all of these things in a really nice and friendly sort of way. So I used C# as the primary API. So if you're a C# developer, if you work in Visual Studio, this should be very familiar. If you're from Unity, you already know C#, so it's also kind of familiar from that angle as well. But StereoKit is built from a native foundation, so it's mostly written in C, styled C++, and you can bind it to whatever you want. I have some bindings to some interesting languages, but I generally consider C# to be the first and foremost primary interface to StereoKit. It does work pretty much everywhere. This is based on OpenXR, so it works on like Android, Quest, HoloLens. It works on Linux and desktop. So just about everywhere that you can run OpenXR, StereoKit also runs, which is really nice. So I've tested this pretty much everywhere. Like anytime a new OpenXR runtime pops up, I'm like, all right, does it work here? And I've got it pretty much covered. So that's kind of exciting. So one of the original inspirations for this was OpenXR itself. So Microsoft was one of the very first people who released an OpenXR runtime. Like I remember when it came out, it was like the 0.9 preview launched, and I was like, oh, that looks kind of cool. And so I gave it a try. I wrote a tutorial about it. So this is kind of the tutorial. It's really simple. You just kind of like wave your hands around and place boxes. But this was written in C with DirectX 11 and OpenXR, and it was like 700 lines of code, which honestly, like, I was a little impressed. I was not expecting it to be quite that easy. I mean, 700 lines of code is not exactly trivial, but it's also easier than I expected. But the thing that really blew my mind was I could deploy this to HoloLens 2 in about 10 seconds. Like the whole compile, deploy, run, 10 seconds. And that was like, having worked with Unity for 10 years, it was kind of like, oh my God, like just 10 seconds, that's all it takes. And I can be on device testing with the real sensors. I was so excited. So this was kind of what originally got me thinking about building something from scratch to begin with. Like, not that hard, really fast. There's some benefits to be gained here. So when I did start on it, I kind of had to sit down and say, all right, so if I'm making a mixed reality engine, this is kind of a tall order, right? Like, who has the time for that? Who has the manpower for that? Like, what does it take? And so I kind of sat down and said, this is a scoping issue. If I can scope this right, then I can tackle a good subset of things. So I set down a couple of tenets that say, like, this is the box that I'm going to work within. And within this box, the experience is going to be fantastic. But this box is large enough to encompass mixed reality, but small enough for a small amount of time or work, So the first one is it's mixed reality focused. I sat down and I said, mixed reality headsets on your head with hand interface. Like, I don't do phone AR. So this is kind of like, there's a few limitations here. Like, I don't do phone AR. This is not necessarily like an end all be all for everything. It's just headset AR. Like, I kind of have this idea that in the long run, most AR will be headset based, and the phone thing is just kind of a stepping stone at the moment. But this allows me to do things like create a user interface that makes these assumptions. Like, all of this is 3D. It's a little bit volumetric. I can even embed this onto objects. Like, you can see over here, this is basically a GLTF radio model with user interface embedded onto parts of it. So it kind of has that volumetric component to the user interface. So it's very much for mixed reality first, and it does all the right things for mixed reality, and it does them easily. So it's not like a library that's tacked on top of it. And it's not something where, like, oh yeah, like I refactored stuff so that it does mixed reality too. It's like, no, this is a first class citizen. Everything is built with this in mind. And so it's just, you don't have to configure as much. You don't have to fight with things. This also means that other stuff is also just built in. So like, this is eye tracking. If you want eye tracking data in your application, you just say input.eyes. There you go. Like, not that hard. QR codes, similarly, this is like, I don't know, 10 or 20 lines of code to get QR codes, the whole pipeline for ingesting QR codes and reading them, doing stuff with them. I have scene understanding stuff built into it, so you can grab the mesh for the environment, put shaders on it, do all that sort of stuff. And I think this was just like doing some mesh stuff, applying lighting to some of the real world mesh, which is kind of fun. It's also doing it to the hand as well. You can see a little bit of the hand glowing too. So like, this stuff is all built in, like, it's all right there. No extra effort involved. Okay, so I mentioned it's a hands first thing. So basically what this means is that at any given point in time, StereoKit provides you with hand information, like skeletal animated hand information. In many cases, like, you don't actually have access to hand tracking. Hand tracking is still something that is arriving. I'm fortunately seeing it coming in just about everything. Like Quest 2 doing hand tracking was a big deal. But we're seeing like Lynx is also doing hand tracking. Like, it's for a headset to start shipping without hand tracking in the future. It's kind of like maybe a non-starter. So I think it's safe to assume that most devices going forward are going to have hand tracking of some sort or another. But if all you have is a controller, it does simulate some hands based off of the buttons that you have pressed. And even if you have a mouse, it'll use the mouse to simulate a hand of some sort or another. All right, so keeping it simple. For some reason, everybody just likes to make complicated APIs. I don't get it. Like, having been writing code for oh my God, I looked at Vulkan. Have you looked at Vulkan? Don't look at Vulkan. So I wanted to go the opposite direction. As a background, as a teacher, I have to think about, like, what does it take for people to learn this sucker? So keeping it simple. I'm just gonna make something that has an easy API, but is still flexible. So I usually give you something up front that is like, that's all. You look at it, like, is that everything? And then maybe there's an overload or some options somewhere in the background if you really need the extra details. But to start with, simple. So this is Hello World. And so I did mention this is code first. but it's easy code. So this is hello world. And basically you got your class, you got your main function, and then this is the code that does the entire application. So initialize StereoKit, load a GLTF from file, and then run the main application loop. In that application loop, you draw the helmet. Then when the application is done, you shut down. And so this is what you get for this chunk of code. Like you get the hands right there, you get a default environment, you get your GLTF model. Pretty simple. Like it only takes one line to load the GLTF, and it only takes one line to draw it. So StereoKit is this. So one thing that really helps allow this is that StereoKit is kind of immediate mode. It doesn't store a lot of state in the background. So you can basically just throw a model at it and it's like, just draw it for this frame. If you have an if frame number is odd, like it'll only draw it on odd frames. It's great. And this kind of allows you to like approach it with a simpler mindset. So if you don't want architecture in your application, you don't really need much architecture in your application. If you really like doing silly things with your architecture, you can build it around this immediate mode interface. The nice thing about this immediate mode interface is it's amenable to just about whatever architecture that you want to build. So I like to say that StereoKit is a bring your own architecture sort of API. Similarly, so I've been the UI person on far too many games, especially within Unity. That's kind of a little bit of a painful experience. I've suffered so much through building user interface, and I really did not want to make anybody suffer any longer. So I've had a couple of really nice experiences with user interface in the past, and these are actually editors. Unity's editor GUI is kind of nice, the older stuff, not the UI elements. I haven't actually looked at UI elements. And then also Dear IM GUI. So if you've worked in native code, and you might have seen Dear IM GUI, and Dear IM GUI was like opening my eyes to something magical and beautiful, and I really loved it. So I kind of went with this immediate mode user interface as well. Kind of fits with the theme of the rest of the engine. And so like you can basically do stuff like UI.button, and you have a button. Right, like I love this sort of thing. If UI.button, do a thing, great. So a lot of the user interface looks very much like this. You'll have like a begin window and end window sort of thing, begin panel, end panel. There's some user interface hierarchies if you're trying to do like, here's a surface on a model or something like that. But again, single line does a single thing. It's great. Now, one of the advantages of doing a code-first API, my light went off. One of the advantages of doing a code-first API is that you've got everything in one place, or a lot of things in one place. So I remember, like, okay, how do you write a tutorial for a game engine with an editor? You have some components, like maybe you'll have 2 or 3 components, maybe you only have 1 if you're lucky. You'll have some 3D models or art assets that you kind of like plop into it from the user interface. You might have like a game object that collects a bunch of these things together. And so this suddenly becomes multiple different pieces of data scattered all over the different places. And so if I wanted to share like a little snippet of something functional on like a forum or a chat community or something like this, it is no longer trivial to share because it's a mess of data. So this, for example, is a ruler. Like it's 30 centimeters long. It's really great for measuring things in VR. It helps me, check my layout and stuff like that. This is the code for that ruler. Like that's the whole thing. I can copy this. I can paste it. I can send it in a text message. I can embed it in the documentation. That's all it is. It's all in one spot. And not everybody's code works this way. But at least with StereoKit's kind of immediate mode interface and a little bit of thought, you can definitely distill a lot of stuff into this really small, compact little bits of code. But in general, just the architecture of code first helps for content to be a lot more shareable, which is neat. Along with making it simple, you need to have good docs for people to learn your stuff. It's only simple if you know it's there and have examples for it. So I spent a lot of time considering docs as a primary, like a first-class citizen of StereoKit. And so the documentation is built from the code I just have little tags in the code that say like, this is code that is now a sample. So it scrapes the code, grabs the code, moves it into the documentation site. It'll actually, I have little lines of code that say like, generate a screenshot from this perspective in this particular scene. So these screenshots are also generated at the same time as this code is scraped. So anytime that I push a release, I regenerate the docs. I know that all the code is live. I know it compiles properly. It's been refactored along with everything else. I know that the screenshots are actually pictures of that code with the latest version. And so I know that all of this stuff is up to date and working properly. And it's really nice. I can also see if I do refactor something, then my Git repository will say like, there's a change over here, and I can check to see if that's near some of these comment docs and make sure that they're up to date as well. So it's not perfect, but it's a good site, better than a lot of the stuff that I've seen. So I've spent a lot of work to make sure that this is nice. I've done a few experiments here too. Like this is something that I really would love to do more of. What I did is for one of the versions, I took the release notes and I built a sample application that just used every single item from the release notes. So you could see like, oh, a new feature got added. What does that look like? And you can check the code for it, and or like run the application and say like, what are all the things that got released? So this was cool. Took a little bit of work. I haven't actually done another one, but I really like the idea. If I had a lot more time, I would do more of these. All right, now I have this weird idea that mixed reality is kind of fun and interesting. And so I'm really disappointed when developing mixed reality is not fun and interesting. So I really wanted to make sure that part of the experience of using StereoKit is that it's fun. It should be, right? Like this is the bleeding edge and it's fantastic. I do all sorts of little prototypes with StereoKit. I build like a lot of procedural content. I do open world stuff. I do user experience prototypes, just little play things. Like, and I feel like I've generally succeeded with the API. Like the API kind of has the sensation of like, it's really easy to do this. It's kind of fun to make these things. You're not like fighting or anything like that. It's not exactly a great like measurable metric, but it's something that I just kind of think about, And okay, so here's the other thing. So one of the big issues is that mixed reality is much more than just games. And right now, we're using game engines to build our mixed reality experiences. So this is kind of, if you sat down and say, okay, how would I build a 3D engine that is for games versus not for games, you go down different paths and you end up with different results. Just certain decisions that you make along the way, certain things that you prioritize. And so I started with this idea that StereoKit is not necessarily about games. One thing that's really important to me is like content creation applications. And so this was like on my mind is like, this is candidate number one. I want to support content creation applications, not just games or whatever. Like you're not going to find light baking or like global illumination or like these crazy animation tools. Like you'll find stuff for making practical applications that you can ship to users and have them interact with the computer system. So like here's one of the first things that I did is I added a file picker. So it has a built-in file picker. When the operating system provides a file picker, I use that first. So on Windows, like a flat screen thing, it's the regular interface. Microsoft's runtime provides a holographic file picker, which is great. It'll spawn that too. On systems where it doesn't have one of those, it'll fall back to one that I've provided. It's kind of basic, but it definitely does the job well. And so you can open files and you can save files, and it's just one line to do it. So like that to me is, it's basically unique. I've not seen a game engine that does that because game engines are not actually concerned about loading files during runtime. And in fact, like this is the other thing too, that you may not have like spotted right away, is that this is all during runtime. Like you don't have to compile these assets. You don't have to put them in your project. You don't have to convert them into an optimized format. StereoKit will load these when it's given them from whatever the source is. It can be from a REST API that gives you a GLTF file, and it's like, great, I will serve this up for you. Just give me a moment to decode everything, parse it properly, and optimize the data. This was something like I encountered a lot when working with customers. You'd go around and like they'd have this custom OBJ loader, and it was the most nightmarish thing you'd ever seen because these people had never worked with 3D data before, and so like the OBJ was pulling in these like duplicate vertices, like why are the faces all flat? And like they did their best. I mean, like this is the first time they've encountered this stuff, but really they shouldn't be having to deal with this stuff. And so StereoKit's entire asset pipeline works at runtime. It has a thread that loads up in the background and does a bunch of things, so it doesn't block stuff. The user formats like GLTF, JPEG, they're a little slower than the optimized stuff that you get for a game engine, but everybody has them. They're all over the place, and you kind of need to be able to work with them. So yeah. Along with that, the very first sample that I made was StereoKit Inc. StereoKit Inc. is the tutorial. It's basically like a little finger painting application that just lets you draw lines and stuff. Oh, my camera went off, sorry. It overheats every once in a while. But yeah, so StereoKit Inc. is kind of nice. It's simple. I think this is like 300 or 400 lines of code, honestly. Like it does everything that you really need it to. It does save, load. It has a really simple undo, redo. It's mostly designed for readability rather than functionality, because I wanted it to be a good learning example, but it's a content creation application. And it's really, it kind of shows off what exactly you can do in 300 lines of StereoKit code. Trivial UI. So like, I've actually got a lot more than this at this point. Like UI is something that I've been focusing on a lot lately. Like I initially didn't consider UI to be an important element of StereoKit. I was kind of hoping that somebody else might light it up for me based off of the graphics capabilities that I was providing. But it turns out that, just like me, nobody likes building UI from scratch. So I got stuck doing it again. And well, fortunately, this time around, doing it this way it's been actually quite enjoyable. So I've been building a lot of different elements like sliders, buttons, tools for building buttons yourself. Like I actually have a font system here that'll load up Unicode characters. So like you can type in Japanese and that just works right out of the box, which is really cool. So I've one of the things that I'm working on for the current update is MRTK-like styling. So I actually also work on the MRTK as well, MRTK for Unity. I kind of do half and half time on those things. And so I'm kind of working on bringing some of the visuals in line with the MRTK, something that looks a little bit more like the holographic thing, but also just generally, making user interface kind of like a really, really robust system. It's already great, but it'll be even more robust in the near future. So this is kind of one project that I worked on. This is a level designer that I built for a running game. Like you just kind of like you're running down a hallway and you dodge a bunch of blocks. And so this is just a small level designer where you go through and place the obstacles by hand. And I think I built this whole level designer in about a day. Like it's not super complicated, but it did the job. I gave it to a couple of level designers and they just had a blast putting things together with us. Yeah, and I did iterate on it a little bit more after that, maybe like another day or two, but I had something functional on the first day. It was really good. So this is like just like grabbing the world around, moving it with your hands. There's buttons in the environment that you can use to place stuff. Some of these are kind of custom controls that you can use some of StereoKit's built-in elements to put together. Yeah, it's fun stuff. Like it's not that hard to do. And performance by default. Okay, so this is the other one. So like I mentioned, where, I met so many people that were building their own model loaders. Like one of the problems is that, not everybody's a graphics programmer. Like I love graphics programming. I'm an optimization nerd. I love doing this stuff, but that's not everybody. And especially people who come from enterprise, performance is not something that is quite as critical as it is to games and three-dimensional graphics. And so you really need to have good options that work by default and make it a little harder to shoot yourself in the foot. Like if you ever put on a post-processing effect in your VR application, you've already done something wrong, but it's so easy to do that in a game engine, you know? So like I went through and I made a bunch of decisions that, you know, may not necessarily be great for somebody trying to crank out the most graphically fantastic thing in the world, but it'll be performant. It'll hit frame rates just fine. As long as you're not doing anything really crazy, it's good. So I ship with physically based rendering stuff. And this is all mobile friendly. So I always test this stuff on like HoloLens and Quest and things like this. It handles these like a champ. So these are really, really fast shaders. This isn't the default shader though. The default shader looks just as good as this. It's image-based lighting stuff, but PBR shaders are there for GLTF support, since a lot of GLTFs are completely based around PBR, physically based rendering, if anybody was wondering. So this is the default lighting system. So I use something called spherical harmonics. It's basically a mathematical representation of intensity on a circle. And so if you have 3 of those, you get RGB intensity in a sphere. And so this is like a small editor that allows you to build a spherical harmonics representation using a number of different lights, and it just kind of adds them together and creates some lightings. And so this is actually a really, really fast way to get really clean looking lighting. So you can see on there, like that model looks fantastic in this light. It's really easy to get this. And the performance of this is absolutely bonkers fast. Like there's almost nothing going on in this. And it just looks so great. Now, the other thing, like this is the lights mode. There's also an image mode. So you can just pull up like an HDRI image, like an equirectangular or regular cube map or something like that. And it'll just generate lighting from that instead. So that's a really fast way to get a decent background with some matching lighting instead. Now, so this is really fast. The downside here is that StereoKit doesn't have dynamic lights by default. So if you have like point lights, or if you want shadows or stuff like this, like those aren't in StereoKit by default. And in fact, that's kind of a problem. Like, you know, unless you know what you're doing, if you are tossing lights into a scene in XR, like that's a performance issue. Shadows in particular will kill your frame rate again, like because it's basically rendering the scene an additional time to get the depth map. So it looks pretty good as is, and kind of remove some of those options for shooting yourself in the foot. Now you can actually do dynamic lights if you want to. Like if you saw in the previous one where I was like shifting these lights around in the environment, like you can totally do it. It's entirely possible. You just have to go through a couple of additional steps in order to add stuff like that in. So it's a little bit harder to do that. And you kind of have to at least know what the ramifications are when you do it. Okay, so that's the majority of it. So let me just show you a little bit about where to go. So the very first thing, I ship StereoKit as a NuGet package for Visual Studio. So you can basically just go to NuGet, include it in your C# project and go. The other way that I do this is with Visual Studio templates, which just installs a .NET Core and a UWP template, and you can just go new project, make it a StereoKit project, and it fills in a little bit of the code for you, gives you something to work with right off of the bat. So I recommend people getting started, just go grab the Visual Studio template. It is also on GitHub. It's open sourced. It's MIT licensed, so you can grab it. You can look at the code. You can fork it if you want to. It's fine. So it's there. Like that's kind of cool. Now, I would generally recommend only going to here for like there's a couple of things under the examples folder that can be nice to look at, but for the most part, you don't really need to mess with this. The primary method of consumption is via NuGet and templates. StereoKit.net. This is where the docs are. There's a getting started guide there. Like it's pretty fast to go through. It takes like 15 minutes to get onto a device. There is the StereoKit tutorial. This is StereoKit Inc. So that's basically just a GitHub repository with a lot of comments. I think it's neat. If you're a code person, you might think it's neat too, but it's not as hand-holdy as the getting started guide on StereoKit.net. So yeah, that's kind of the basics of it. There's the links. Oh, that's an old link now. I did have a hackathon. That was pretty fun. Here's some animation. I did add skeletal animation. It's great. I'm also on Twitter. I'll post a lot of things about StereoKit on Twitter. So if you want to see what the latest is on there, you can hit me up on that. There's also a Discord channel. If you go to stereokit.net, there's a Discord. I typically share in there pretty fast, and that's also one of the fastest ways to get support on the tool as well. But yeah, that's about it. And I think there's a whole bunch of chat things up here. Ooh, I should have been paying attention to this. All right. Okay.
You work on Oculus Quest?
Yes. So Quest was definitely something that I spent a lot of time making sure that it worked with. It is not part of the main templates that I ship, though, unfortunately. I've been kind of struggling to find a good way to make a template that does Quest. But if you look at the Getting Started guide, there is a link to kind of an in-development Quest project or cross-platform template. It does Quest, HoloLens, as well as desktop. And that'll work just fine. Like you kind of have to like copy and paste it. So it's not as easy as creating a new project from template, but it'll totally do the trick.
Is it use Unity, or is it from the background, built from the ground up?
It is from the ground up, completely separate from Unity. So yeah, no Unity involved. It's a good thing and a bad thing. Like it doesn't come with any of Unity's baggage, but yeah, it does mean that it's a different environment.
I think we have a couple questions in the chat. I can see that John asked about the to match ambient lighting.
Can I match? Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a question. So one of the products that I did at Microsoft was the mixed reality lighting tools. This is something that I published for Unity. It basically would take pictures of the environment and build up the spherical harmonics of that environment. And this was pretty awesome. I loved it, but it was specific to Unity. I'm still working on getting something like that back into StereoKit. It'll make it there eventually, just not quite yet. HDRI, spherical harmonics, so like light probes. Yeah, basically the spherical harmonics are kind of the core tech behind most light probes. So it's basically like a single light probe that represents the whole environment. How many shaders do I need to recompile?
You're just talking about how what you were doing seemed a little different than, you know, that you're doing everything at runtime. And I use a lot of Unreal. Oh,
okay. Yeah, so I don't actually support shader variants. So it's generally not one of those explosive things. I have a number of shaders that StereoKit ships with that cover all the basics. I think the more forward-looking recommendation for shaders is actually just to stick an if in there. If you have a conditional that is the same for every execution of that shader, then it's actually supposed to be very cheap. So like if you just have a flag in your material and like if this flag, then not actually a big deal. At least that's the recommendation. I haven't profiled this as well as I would like to, but I'm kind of trying to go in that direction.
Oh, and then so I can't afford a HoloLens and I'm not going anywhere near Facebook for moral reasons. How can I run StereoKit?
You can do it on desktop for sure. Okay. So I do have like a simulator that works right away. And it's basically a flat screen experience. Right. And that'll work with any desktop headset as well. There is the Lynx that's coming up, which I think is a very interesting device. I have a couple of people in the community that are very excited about that. I'm very excited about it as well. That is something I'm definitely going to make sure that it works on that.
I'm definitely going to need like a Windows desktop to be able to do anything with StereoKit, right?
Yeah, I think the one place where it doesn't work yet is on Mac OS. So this is like, I haven't prioritized this largely because Apple does not have a mixed reality headset yet. But it is something that's kind of at the back of my mind because I'm sure they will eventually. It's probably not going to be OpenXR. Very disappointed, but Yeah.
That's fair. I mean, no headset, no support seems like a reasonable way to go.
Though actually, I have seen people who have used Mac OS to deploy to an Android device. So like Mac OS to Quest, and that does work as long as you're not doing the local simulator.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Does StereoKit always export as a native app? So yes. It depends a little bit on how you mean as a native app. So it's a C# application. So that does mean it uses C# deployment stuff. On UWP HoloLens, that does involve like a .NET native compile step where it actually gets translated to C++ code. For like desktop C#, it's run as intermediate language. You can actually do .NET Watch there, which is really nice. One of the advantages of not being something like Unity is that I get to use real C#. And real C# comes with new language features, which are really nice, as well as all the environmental tooling like .NET Watch, where you just like run the application, modify the code, and a hot reload stuff. So that's kind of cool. I do have in progress some WebAssembly stuff. So if you are using StereoKit from the native side does actually compile to WebAssembly. I'm still working on making that work with C# and as well as getting some of the WebXR stuff in. So sometime in the next couple of months, I will probably have web and WebXR support here as well, which may be another route to get things working on macOS.
Yeah, WebXR, I'm thinking that's a good way to go.
Yeah, it's man, I remember one of my favorite things with Unity was back before WebAssembly was a thing. They had the Unity web player, and oh my god, like it was so good. Like you could just push a game up onto there with the Unity web player, and it would be like a couple of kilobytes, and it was amazing. You could share stuff. I loved it so much. So I definitely want to get back to that sort of experience with StereoKit. Okay. Have I experimented with developing on Roblox VR? I don't actually, I haven't really touched Roblox. So I don't really know what that's like at all. Sorry.
So Nick, this is Mike. I was curious, you mentioned, do you actually have to do much porting to actually support different OpenXR implementations, or is it, or the fact you're supporting OpenXR generally, it works?
Typically, no. For the most part, a new OpenXR runtime will just work. Now, Android is kind of a little bit of an exception because it kind of got off to a slow start. So OpenXR shipped without Android support. And so Oculus also shipped before OpenXR had Android support. And so their implementation is kind of a little tangential. So I'm one of the things that StereoKit does right now is it prioritizes Oculus's headset. So it'll deploy to an Oculus headset, but it won't deploy to others. And this is largely because, you know, most of the people who are doing the development are on a Quest. And this is because they don't have the general OpenXR or the general Android loader. They use an Oculus specific loader. So I just need to switch out the Oculus loader with the Android loader. It's actually not too hard to do this already. I just need to find a good way to ship this to users. So this is kind of why I mentioned that I do want to make sure that Lynx works. Right now, with the existing packages, it is probably a little bit tricky to do that. But I still have a little bit of time to do that. Lynx hasn't shipped yet.
Do you support Pico?
It would be kind of the same sort of story with a Pico. If I had access to a Pico, I might do that a little sooner. But it's so basically there's like an OpenXR loader.so that ships with the NuGet package, and if you swap out the Oculus one for a Pico one, then it'll work.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you want to try that, let me know. I can kind of help you walk through some of the details with that. But this will be, so the other thing is the one thing that will solve a lot of my problems is .NET MAUI. So .NET 6, 7, I don't know exactly when they're planning on shipping this. .NET MAUI is currently in preview, and it's kind of like this cross-platform .NET tooling. It's kind of like the next generation of Xamarin, where they fold in like Windows, macOS, web, and Android all into a single project. And that'll basically solve my templating issue. The big reason why I haven't published the cross-platform template is because it's tough to get that all wrapped into one. And so once Maui comes out, I'm going to use that. I'm going to ship that, and that'll probably be where I invest most of my Android efforts in the future.
So is there anybody else on the project other than you?
Yeah. So I'm probably the primary contributor. I've been working on this since the beginning, and I probably have written like 90% of the code base. There are a couple of people in the community that have been quite enthusiastic contributors. Like Linux support was actually not done by me. I did a lot of the Android stuff, and then somebody else came along and said, that's close enough to Linux, and they hopped in and made that happen. There's a few people at Microsoft that'll occasionally contribute as well. And yeah, it's largely me at the moment, but there's definitely other people involved.
Is there any showcase of apps that other people developed the platform? Or?
There's so I did a hackathon for StereoKit in November, and there's kind of like a gallery of applications in that hackathon. Like I think if you went to that link, the aka.ms/StereoKit hack, that one does have a project gallery over there. And so that was like a month-long hack, and so you can kind of see like what people can do within that time frame, which is kind of neat. There was some cool stuff in there. Other than that, I often will retweet stuff when I see it. So my Twitter feed sometimes has a few of those things too. Yeah, actually, one of the cool things about StereoKit being a code-first sort of thing that's fairly lightweight. Actually, like my binaries are less than 2 megabytes. Very happy about that. So because it's so lightweight and it exposes like a C level, it is a good candidate for middleware. So I've actually seen a number of people basically take StereoKit and build an engine on top of it, which is pretty sweet. Like it's one of the things that I really wanted people to be able to do with StereoKit. So there's a couple of projects like that out there.
Nice.
That's pretty cool. I have a question. Can you recommend seeing like a video tutorials if you have it, or somebody maybe did it?
There are a few video tutorials. April Spate worked on a few, and they're in the Getting Started guide. They're basically kind of like walking through the first few steps. There is also, I believe there's a Microsoft Learn module that kind of works through StereoKit Inc. to some extent. I was a little bit involved with this, and it's okay. But it is, if you're a little bit more into the hand-holding sort of thing, it might be an easier way to walk through StereoKit Inc. than just digging through the comments.
Okay, thank you. And my other question, what kind of plan you have for the ER experience for the future?
AR?
Yeah, AR, like for the ER experience, because all the cases what you're showing is most of the VR experience, but what about ER? Like,
yeah, I actually, so like everything that you see there also works in AR just fine. Like the only reason they tend to be within VR is that it often, it's easier to record.
That's true. Yeah.
So yeah, like honestly, like HoloLens 2 is my, product number one. I work for Microsoft, that's my thing. So right. HoloLens 2 has always been my priority. It gets most of my attention. So it's definitely like, a first class AR library. And so like there's a world class, I think, that does a lot of these things. There's a bunch of things just kind of scattered around that are working with AR versus VR.
Oh, that's cool. And the reason why I ask you, because like, especially like, I think this year it's going to be a lot like on the market, new AR glasses. So, and most of them based for the Android system. So I think it's pretty cool just to have like something template, you can build some cool experience for the AR glasses.
Yeah, actually, one of the things that I released recently was support for the Oculus pass-through extension. It's like, honestly, having the Oculus pass-through thing is just so neat. It's basically like having a HoloLens tethered to your desktop. I think the Quest actually does hand tracking as well as AR pass-through with Quest Plus Link. So that's even better. Like, I've been enjoying that a lot recently.
So how much real world interaction can you do with StereoKit? Like, can
Like-
I have virtual objects hide behind real objects and the like?
Yeah, so scene understanding is the primary thing that allows for this. Right now, StereoKit's scene understanding implementation is primarily about like grabbing the world mesh. The world mesh is kind of like a lower resolution designed for raycasting or occlusion or stuff like that. So you can do that pretty easily.
Okay.
There's a few things in the scene understanding library that I haven't exposed just yet. Like scene understanding also does plane finding and things like that. Like it can tell you like, this is the floor, this is a wall or something like that. But I haven't surfaced that just yet. It's kind of a complicated extension. And I like, there's kind of like this thing where like because a lot of this stuff is coming in very new and fresh, there's the question of will this be a stable API? Will I be able to depend on it when somebody else ships a scene understanding extension? So I sometimes for those things I may wait a little bit to see what other people come up with. Like if two vendors can create an extension, then I can usually sit down and make a nice abstraction of it. But plane finding is not one of those quite yet. Only Microsoft has plane finding on OpenXR.
Cool.
Yeah, the extension stuff is wild.
Oh, is
I
that if
also-
I plug something?
Sorry?
I was asking the hosts actually.
Oh,
Sure. Well, does anybody else have any questions for Nick before that? Or?
Does it do multi-user? Does it support multi-user mode with
so
StereoKit?
StereoKit does not do networking by default. Like one of the tricks is because StereoKit stores no state, it contains no state to share across the network. But because it is C# and it's real C#, you also have access to NuGet and the entire ecosystem of C# tooling. And there's a lot of networking tools out there for regular C#. So you can definitely do it. I've seen a lot of people doing multi-user experiences with StereoKit already.